I have told this story exactly twice in my life. Once at a kitchen table to a man who needed to hear it, and once to a chaplain who did not ask but listened anyway. I am going to tell it a third time now, and then I am going to leave it alone, because some things you carry are not made lighter by setting them down, only quieter. I was 23 years old the summer they gave us the new driver, and I knew everything there was to know about everything, which is to say I knew almost nothing, and had not yet been humbled enough to suspect it. I was a gunner on the lead trucks of a supply column that ran fuel and water and ammunition up the long dry road we called the Throat, a road that climbed out of the flats and threaded a series of dead riverbeds before it reached the outposts that depended on us. We were not heroes. We were a moving warehouse with machine guns, and we knew the difference, and we wore it like a chip on the shoulder, the way young men do when they are afraid, and have decided to call the fear something prouder. She came to us on a Tuesday with a duffel and a quiet way of standing, and the first thing anyone said about her, the very first thing, was that she was only the driver. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make the men of that column into villains, and they were not villains. They were tired and they were young and most of them were good, and the cruelty that lives in a place like that is rarely the loud kind. It is the small kind. It is the joke that everyone laughs at because laughing is easier than thinking. When the convoy commander, a hard, square-built captain named Reyes, read her onto the roster and pointed her toward the rear trucks, the fuel haulers, the slow, ugly tankers that nobody wanted to drive because they were a rolling invitation to die, nobody objected. Of course she would drive the tankers. She was the new arrival. She was a woman in a column of men who had decided in advance what a woman in a column of men could be. "You ever pushed one of these big girls through soft sand?" Reyes asked her, not unkindly, the way you'd ask a child if they'd ever ridden a bike. He had a clipboard and a way of not quite looking at the people he spoke to. "Some," she said. "Some?" He almost smiled. "Well, keep her between the lines, stay off the brakes in the wadis, and if anything happens, you point that truck back the way we came and you don't stop for anybody. You're not here to fight. You're here to keep the fuel rolling. That's the whole job." "Understood," she said. That was the whole of it. He turned away before she finished the word. I remember thinking she would be gone in a month, transferred or broken by the heat or the boredom, or the low grinding contempt that a place like that pours over anyone it has decided is beneath it. I remember thinking it and feeling nothing about it at all, which is the part I am least proud of. Her name does not matter to this story, and anyway I am not going to give it, because by the end she had a different name, one the enemy used before we did, and that is the one worth remembering. But in those first weeks she was just the driver, and we treated her like a piece of equipment that had been issued to us, useful but uninteresting, a thing you checked off a list. She did not complain. That was the first thing about her that did not fit, though I did not let myself notice it for a long while. The desert teaches everyone to complain. It is how men bleak off the pressure. They curse the heat and the food and the road and the officers and each other, a steady low music of grievance that runs under everything, and she was simply not part of it. She did her pre-check slow and complete. She walked the length of her truck with one hand trailing on the hull, the way you'd run a hand along the flank of a horse, and she looked at things the rest of us had stopped seeing, the set of the wheels, the lean of the load, the way the dust hung or didn't in the morning air. She kept her boots squared and her kit squared and her mouth shut, and the men decided this meant she had nothing to say. We had a young trooper named Dahlan, a good kid with a bad mouth, who appointed himself the column's entertainment. On the third or fourth morning, while we waited on the staging pad for the order to roll, he started in on her. Nothing vicious, just the usual. "Hey, you need a hand with that," he called, watching her check the chains on her load. "Heavy work, all those straps. We got guys for that." She didn't look up. "I've got it." "You sure? My sister couldn't open a pickle jar." A couple of the men laughed. The laughter was the point. "What you do before this?" Real job, I mean. You drive a school bus or something, cut hair." She finished the chain she was on, gave it the small extra pull that seats a hook, and moved to the next one. "Something like that," she said. Dahlin grinned around at his audience, pleased with himself. "I'm just saying, if it gets hot up there, real hot, you stick close to the trucks and let us handle it. We'll keep you safe, sweetheart. That's a promise." I was standing close enough to see her face, and I will tell you what was in it, because I have had years to think about it. There was no anger. There was no hurt. There was something far stranger than either, something I did not have a word for then and barely have one for now. She looked at Dahlin the way a doctor looks at a man who is bragging about how he doesn't need a checkup. She looked at him like she knew something about how this ended and was sorry for him in advance. "Thanks," she said, and that was all. She turned back to her chains. The men took it as a victory. I took it as a victory. We were fools, all of us, and the desert was patient, and it was already coming for us, and she was the only one in that whole column who could feel it on the wind. I have thought a great deal in the years since about why we did it, about why a column of men, most of them decent, will fix on the one person among them who is different and decide, without conferring, without anyone giving the order, that she is less. I think it is fear, mostly. I think a place like that, a place where you might die any hour of any day for no reason at all, breeds a need to feel that you understand the rules, that you know who is strong and who is weak, that you have the world sorted into boxes you can trust. A woman driving the fuel trucks did not fit the boxes, and rather than let her trouble the boxes, we shrank her to fit one. We made her small so that the world would stay the size we needed it to be. And the terrible joke of it, the joke the desert was already laughing at while we mocked her on the staging pad, was that she was the largest thing among us, larger than all of us put together, and we had buried that largeness under a word, driver, and patted the dirt down flat and congratulated ourselves on a tidy grave. She let us. That is the part that humbles me most, looking back. She knew what she was. She knew, every morning watching us perform our small cruelties, exactly what stood inside her that we could not see, and she let us go on not seeing it. She did not announce herself, did not pull rank she surely could have pulled, did not put any of us in our place with a word she certainly possessed. She drove the trucks and checked her chains and took the jokes and waited, not for her moment, because she did not want a moment, but simply waited, the way the strong can wait, secure in a thing that needs no witness. I did not understand that kind of strength then. I had only ever seen the loud kind, the kind that needs an audience. Hers was the other kind, the kind that does not care whether anyone is watching, and I have come to believe it is the only kind that is real. We rolled out on a Thursday under a white sky with the heat already standing up off the road in sheets. I rode the gun on the third truck, behind Ray's and the scout vehicle, and her tankers ran in the back third of the column where the rule book said the fuel should ride, far from the front, last to reach any fight. From my position I could not see her. I could only see the long brown spine of the convoy ahead, and the dust we dragged behind us like a tail, and the country opening up flat and merciless on either side. I want to describe that country, because it matters, because she read it like a book the rest of us could not even hold right side up. The flats ran for miles, hardpan and gravel and low scrub, and then the ground began to fold. First it was just swells, long shallow rises, and then the swells deepened into the dry riverbeds, the wadis, where 10,000 years of vanished water had carved channels into the rock. Some were shallow enough to drive across without slowing. Some were deep enough to swallow a truck. The road, such as it was, threaded between and through them, and the worst stretch, the one we all hated, was where the wadis came together into a single deep crooked channel with high broken walls on both sides. We called it the throat. You went into it single file because there was no other way, and for about 4 miles you could not turn around and you could not climb out and you could not see what was waiting at the far end. Every man in the column held his breath in the throat. Every man counted the seconds. It was the kind of place that had been designed by God or geology specifically for an ambush, and we all knew it, and there was nothing to be done about it except go fast and pray. She knew it differently. I learned that later, learned it in pieces, the way you reassemble a thing after it has broken on you. But even that first day, before any of it, I caught a glimpse of how her mind worked, though I didn't understand what I was seeing. We stopped at midday to cool the engines and check the loads. I walked the line, stretching my legs, and I passed her truck and saw her standing a little apart from it, up on a low rise, just looking. Not resting. Not smoking. Looking. She had her head tilted back and a little to the side, and she was watching the air over the wadis ahead, the shimmer of the heat, the way the dust devils spun up and died, the birds that lifted off the far rocks and the ones that didn't. "See something?" I asked. I meant it as a jab. I was Dahlon's age in the heart even if I was a year older in the body. She didn't turn. "The dust's wrong up ahead," she said. I looked where she was looking and saw nothing. Just heat and rock and the white sky. "Looks like dust to me." "It is dust, that's the problem." She pointed, a small economical gesture, 2 fingers. "There and there. Those plumes aren't the wind. Wind lays them down flat and moves them along. Those are standing up and holding. Something put them up and stopped. Vehicles or men sitting where they shouldn't be sitting in country where nobody lives." I squinted. I genuinely could not tell the difference between the dust she meant and any other dust. So somebody's out there. Goat herders. Always somebody out there. "Maybe," she lowered her hand. "Herders move. They move because the goats move. That dust hasn't moved in the 20 minutes I've been watching it. Whatever's making it wants to stay exactly where it is." She finally looked at me, and there was nothing unkind in it, just that same strange patience. When the ground tells you something, Corporal, the polite thing is to listen the first time. It usually only says it once. I laughed it off. I went back to my truck and I told the gunner beside me that the driver thought she was a fortune teller now, reading the future in the dust, and we both had a good chuckle about it. I want you to understand how completely I missed it. She had just told me plainly, in the flat language of fact, that there were men waiting for us up ahead in the one place we could not survive them, and I laughed because she was only the driver, and what could she possibly know? Rays called the column up. We mounted and rolled, and the ground folded higher around us, and the road dropped down toward the mouth of the throat, and I checked my gun and chewed my dry tongue and thought about nothing at all, while back in the third column of trucks, a woman the Army had decided was a chauffeur sat behind the wheel of a fuel tanker and watched the standing dust draw closer, and did the only thing she could do, which was to make ready in the quiet of her own mind for what she alone knew was coming. There were other things in those weeks before the throat that I did not weigh at the time and have weighed 1,000 times since. The driver did not drive the way the rest of us drove. We fought the trucks, wrestled them, cursed them, hammered the gears and rode the brakes and treated the machines like stubborn animals to be beaten into going where we wanted. She did not fight her truck. She drove it the way I imagined she had once flown, with a kind of listening in it, her hands light on the wheel, her head cocked a half-degree to catch the note of the engine, easing the big tanker through soft ground that bogged better men, finding the firm line across a wash that the rest of us only found by getting stuck first and learning the hard way. She never got stuck. In all those weeks, on all that bad ground, she never once had to be winched or pushed or dug out. And the rest of us, who got stuck constantly, who spent half our lives with shovels and tow chains, never thought to wonder how a chauffeur drove better than soldiers who'd been doing it for years. I remember one evening in particular. We had lagered up for the night in a shallow bowl off the road, the truck circled, and a sandstorm came up out of the south, the kind that turns the air to brown soup and steals the world a foot past your face. The young troopers panicked, the way you do your first real storm, blind and choking, and Rays was shouting orders no one could hear. And in the middle of it I saw the driver, calm as still water, walking the line of the trucks, checking the chains, her face rapt, her movements unhurried, completely at home in the chaos. She found me where I'd gone down on one knee with my eyes streaming, and she put a hand on my shoulder and leaned in close and said, "Breathe slow through the cloth. Don't fight it. It'll pass in 20 minutes. And it did. And I remember thinking dimly through the grit and the misery that she said it the way a person says a thing they have said before, in worse storms than this, to more frightened men than me. I let the thought go. She was only the driver. The storm passed and I forgot it. I have not forgotten it since. I have come to think that the whole of who she was could be read in that one small moment if a person had eyes to read it. The calm that was not the absence of fear but the mastery of it. The competence that did not need to be seen to be real. The instinct to put a hand on a frightened man's shoulder in the middle of the storm and give him the one true thing he needed. We had all of it in front of us for weeks, plain as the road. We simply would not look. The mouth of the throat is a thing I still see when I close my eyes. The walls rose up red and broken on either side, 50 feet, 60, scarred with the marks of old floods, pocked with shadowed clefts and ledges. The road narrowed until there was room for one vehicle and no more. The temperature dropped a few degrees in the shade of the walls and the sound changed. The engines suddenly loud and close and echoing, thrown back at us off the rock. We went in single file the way we always did, the scout truck first, then Ray's, then me, then the long worm of the column trailing back out into the sunlight, the tankers last of all. I remember the radio crackling. I remember Ray's voice, flat and bored, calling the checkpoints. I remember the gunner beside me humming something tuneless. I remember the precise quality of the light, hard and slanted, the way it cut the channel into bands of glare and shadow. And I remember the exact moment the day broke in half, though at the time I did not understand that was what was happening. It came as a sound from above and behind us, a heavy beating thud that we all knew and loved, the sound of our own air cover, the gunship that had been shadowing the column from a few miles off, coming in closer now that we were in the bad ground. It was the most welcome sound in the world. As long as that bird was up there, no sane enemy would spring a trap, because the gunship would turn the whole channel into a furnace. We heard it and we relaxed, every one of us, the way you relax when the big brother walks into the room. Then the sound changed. The steady beat stuttered. There was a flat, hard crack from up on the wall, a sound I had never heard before and have heard too many times since, and the beating of the rotors went ragged and high and wrong, and somebody on the radio started shouting, and the gunship that was supposed to keep us safe came down out of the white sky trailing smoke, passed over the lip of the throat and fell. I did not see it hit. I heard it. There is a sound a thing that large makes when it comes apart against the earth, and the rock walls of the throat took that sound and multiplied it and threw it back and forth between them, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once, a tearing, roaring crash with a deep bass shudder under it that I felt in my chest and my teeth. A column of black smoke stood up over the lip of the channel ahead, oily and thick, and the radio dissolved into a single shrieking wall of voices, everyone keying at once, no one hearing anyone. And then the walls opened up on us. I have tried many times to describe what an ambush in a closed channel feels like, and I have never gotten it right, because it is not one thing. It is everything at once. It is the air filling with noise. It is the rock spitting sparks and dust where the rounds strike. It is the windscreen of the scout truck going white and then red. It is the man beside you slumping without a sound. It is the understanding, arriving all at once in your whole body before your mind can shape it into words, that you have driven into a place where people who want you dead have been waiting, patiently, for exactly this, and that they hold every advantage there is to hold, the height and the cover and the surprise and the time, and that you hold nothing at all except the inside of a metal box that is now the most dangerous place in the world to be. They had us perfectly. I understood the shape of it even then in the first chaos of it because the shape was unmistakable. They had let the gunship come in close and they had killed it first, with something heavy up on the high wall, so that our protection died in the first 3 seconds. Then they had opened up from both walls at once along the length of the channel, a horseshoe of guns with us inside the curve of it, so that every truck in the column was taking fire from above on both sides with no angle to shoot back that wasn't straight up into the sun. The scout truck was already dead, slewed across the road, burning. Ray's vehicle had stopped behind it. The whole column concertinaed, truck nosing up on truck, and we were stalled and stacked and pinned in the one stretch of ground on the entire route where being stalled and stacked and pinned meant dying. I did what I had been trained to do, which was to put my gun up on the high wall and fire, and I will be honest with you, it accomplished nothing. I could not see them. They were in the clefts and behind the ledges, and I was shooting at muzzle flashes and shadows, hosing rounds up a 60-foot wall while they fired down at me from cover, and the only thing my fire did was tell them where I was. A burst walked across the hood of my truck and up the windscreen frame, and my gunner went down, and I dropped into the truck bed with rock dust in my eyes and my ears ringing, and the certain knowledge, cold and total, that we were going to be killed here, all of us, in the next few minutes, and there was not one thing I could do about it. The radio was useless. The relay we needed sat on the far side of the high wall, and in the channel the signal bounced and died. We could not call for help. The bird that was our help was a burning ruin a quarter-mile ahead. There was no one coming. There was no cavalry over the hill. There was only us, stacked up and dying, and the enemy on the walls taking their time, and the long, bright afternoon ahead of them to finish the work. That is when I saw her move. From the truck bed I had a sliver of view back down the column, past the trucks stacked behind mine, all the way to the tankers at the rear. And I saw, through the smoke and the dust and the impossible noise, the door of her tanker open, and the driver step down into the kill zone. I want to be precise about this, because it is the hinge of everything, and I have turned it over in my mind 10,000 times. She did not run. Every instinct a body has in that situation screams at you to get small, get behind something, get away. The rounds were coming down on the rear of the column too. They had the whole length of us, and she stepped out of the one place that offered any protection at all, the cab of her truck, and she stood up straight in the open for a moment, and she looked. She looked the way she had looked at the dust, head tilted, taking it in. In the middle of the worst noise I have ever heard, with men dying up and down the line, she stood in the open and read the battle the way the rest of us could not, and I understand now what she was doing, though I did not then. She was finding the geometry of it. She was a pilot, and a pilot's whole art is the art of reading a three-dimensional space at speed and understanding where the threats are and where the lanes are and how the shape of the ground channels everything that moves through it. She was looking at those walls the way she'd looked at them from the air 100 times in her other life, the life none of us knew about, and she was seeing what I could not see, which was not a wall of death but a structure, a thing with weaknesses, a problem with a solution. Then she moved, and she moved fast, and from that moment until the end she did not stop. The wrecked scout truck and the gunship were ahead, beyond the front of the column, but there was a closer wreck. Ray's vehicle, the second in line, had taken fire and stalled, and its gunner was dead in the turret, and mounted on that turret was the heaviest weapon in the column, a belt-fed gun that could reach and hold the high walls in a way my little gun never could, except that it was forward near the front, and she was at the rear, and between her and that gun lay the entire length of the stacked, burning, fire-swept column. She covered that distance on foot. I watched her do it. She went up the line between the trucks and the wall, in the narrow band of dead ground at the very base of the cliff, where the angle was too steep for the men above to fire straight down, a band maybe a yard wide that none of the rest of us had even seen, because none of the rest of us had been reading the geometry. She had found the one safe seam in the whole channel in the first 10 seconds. The line where the height that gave them their advantage also took it away, and she ran it, low and fast, while the rounds cracked off the rock above her head and chewed the road a yard to her side. And she did not stop, and she did not flinch, and she did not fire a shot, because firing would have slowed her and given her away. And she had already decided in that first long look exactly what she was going to do. She reached Ray's truck. I lost her for a moment behind the smoke, and then I saw her come up onto the back of it and pull the dead gunner clear with a strength and a gentleness that I would not have believed if I had not watched it, easing him down out of the turret instead of dumping him. And then she stepped up into the mount herself and put her hands on that heavy gun. And the battle changed. Up to that point our fire had been noise. Frightened men shooting at shadows, accomplishing nothing but to draw more fire down on themselves. What she did with that gun was not noise. It was the opposite of noise. It was the most deliberate, economical, surgical thing I have ever seen done with a weapon, and I have seen a great deal done with weapons. She did not spray the walls. She read them. I could see her head moving, that same tilt, taking in the whole structure of the ambush in a way the rest of us never had, and then she began to fire in short, precise bursts, and every burst went somewhere specific, and somewhere specific stopped firing back. She had understood the ambush the way an aviator understands a battlefield, as a system of positions, each one with a sector it could cover, and a sector it could not, each one dependent on the ones beside it. And she began, methodically, to take the system apart. I learned afterward, when there was finally time to understand anything, what she had seen from that first long look. The enemy had set their guns to cover the road. That was the whole logic of the horseshoe, every position laid to rake the channel where the trucks were. But a gun laid to fire down at the road cannot easily fire at the gun across the channel from it, because the walls and the angles get in the way. Each of their positions was strong against us and weak against the position opposite. And she, up on that mount with the one weapon in the column that could reach the high walls, was not down on the road. She had height of her own, a little just enough, and she had a clear understanding of which of their guns could see her and which could not, and she worked it like arithmetic. She took the positions that could see her first, the few that had the angle to hurt her, and she took them with a speed and accuracy that I would have called impossible an hour earlier, 2 and 3 rounds each, and then she went after the rest in an order that I did not understand until later, when someone explained to me that she was rolling up the ambush from its weak end, collapsing it inward, forcing the survivors to either fall back or expose themselves to her or to each other. There was a rhythm to how she worked it that I have only understood in the years since, talking to men who flew, men who explained to me what I had watched without comprehending. She was not, they told me, doing anything that an attack pilot does not do every time she goes to work. She was managing a problem with too many threats and too little time by ranking them. Which gun can kill me now? Which gun can kill me next? Which gun cannot reach me at all and can therefore wait? The whole art of staying alive in a gunship, one of them told me, is the discipline of the ranking, the iron refusal to be distracted by the loudest threat when a quieter one is the deadlier. Most of us in that channel fired at whatever was firing at us, whatever was loudest, whatever frightened us most in the moment. She fired at what mattered most, in the order it mattered, and never once let the noise pull her off the arithmetic. She was solving the ambush the way she had solved 100 problems at 100 miles an hour in the dark, and the only difference was that this time she was doing it on her feet, on a stalled truck, on the ground, with a gun built for a different war than the one she'd trained for, and it made no difference at all, because the thing she had was not in the aircraft. It was in her. I watched her take a position high on the left wall that had been hammering the front of the column, watched her put 3 rounds into it across a distance and an angle that should not have been makeable, and watched it go silent. I watched her swing without pause to a second position before the men in it had understood the first was gone, and silenced that one too. She was not lucky. I want to be absolutely clear about this, because in the years since I have heard the story told by men who weren't there as though it were a thing of luck, a wild stand, a desperate spray of fire that happened to find its marks. It was the opposite of that. It was the most controlled, most deliberate, least lucky thing I have ever seen. Every burst was a decision. Every shift of the gun was a sentence in an argument she was winning. She had read the whole structure in her first long look from the cab door, and now she was simply executing what she had already seen, position by position, in the order she had already chosen, and the speed of it was not haste. It was fluency, the speed of someone doing a thing they have done 10,000 times in their bones. They had not planned for one person who could see the whole shape of what they had built and pull the keystone out of it. And once she started, she did not give them a single second to recover. That was the part that I think about most. She never paused. She never took cover to breathe. She read and fired and shifted and read and fired again, a steady, terrible rhythm, and the volume of fire coming down on us began, for the first time, to slacken. I came up out of the truck bed. I will not pretend I did it bravely. I did it because, for the first time in that whole nightmare, it seemed possible to do something other than die, and that possibility pulled me up the way a hand pulls a drowning man. I got my gun up and I followed her fire. Wherever she put a burst, I put one after it, and so did Dahlin 2 trucks back, and so did the others, one by one, as we all understood at the same moment that the driver, the only one, was running the battle, and that the thing to do was follow her. We stopped shooting at shadows. We started shooting where she shot, and the horseshoe that had us boxed and dying began slowly to come apart. But they had numbers, and numbers in an ambush are a terrible thing, and they were not finished with us yet. There was a second pulse to it. I felt it before I understood it. The fire from the high walls slackened, yes, but then a new fire opened up lower down, from the broken ground at the base of the channel ahead, and I realized they had a second element, men down low, who had been waiting to come up the road and finish anyone who survived the guns above. They came on foot, using the wrecks and the folds in the ground, working toward us, and they came toward the front of the column, toward the wreck where she stood exposed on the mount, because they had understood, the same way we had, that the woman on the gun was the battle now, and that if they killed her the rest of us would fall apart again. I think they were right about that. I think if they had reached her we would have died, all of us. And I think she knew it, and I think it changed nothing in her at all because she had already accounted for it. That was the thing about her that I have never been able to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. She was always a step ahead of the worst thing. While she was breaking the guns on the walls, she had already seen the men who would come up the road, and she had already chosen the ground where she would stop them. There was a place where the channel pinched, 100 yards ahead of the front truck, where the floods had left a tumble of boulders that funneled the road down to almost nothing. Anyone coming up the channel on foot had to come through that pinch. It was a door, and she had seen it was a door, and the moment the low element committed to coming through it, she swung the gun off the walls and onto that pinch and held it there. I need to tell you what happened to me then, because it is the part I have the least right to tell well, and the most reason to tell true. When the low element came on, I was forward of my own truck, out in the open, doing what she had taught all of us to do in the space of 3 minutes without saying a single word, following her fire, shooting where she shot. And in following it I had gone too far forward, out past the cover of the trucks, into the bad open ground near the front of the column, and when the men on foot came up through the pinch and she swung the gun to meet them, I was caught between her gun and their guns, in the open, with nothing around me but flat road and the burning hulk of the scout truck. A round took me through the leg. I did not feel it as pain at first. I felt it as the road coming up to meet me, as my body simply ceasing to hold me, and then I was down on the hardpan with my own gun 3 feet away, and the men coming up the channel toward me and no way on earth to reach cover or the weapon or anything at all. I remember the gravel against my cheek. I remember thinking, with a strange flat clarity, that this was the place I was going to die, this exact square yard of road, and that it was an ugly place, and I was sorry about that. Sorry in a small, embarrassed way, as if I had been caught somewhere I shouldn't be. And then there were hands on the back of my vest, and I was moving, dragged backward across the road faster than I would have thought a body could be dragged, and the fire that had been walking toward me was suddenly answered, hammered back, by the heavy gun firing right over the top of me so close that the muzzle blast pounded my ears flat. She had come down off the mount. She had seen me go down in the open, one trooper, one of the men who had mocked her on the staging pad, and she had made a decision that no rule book in the world would have endorsed. She had left the gun that was holding the whole battle together, and come down into the open to pull me out. I have asked myself for years why she did it. Tactically, it was the wrong move. The gun was everything. I was one man. By every cold calculation, she should have let me die and kept the gun firing. But she came down, and she got a fist in my vest, and she hauled me back 20 yards into the cover of Ray's truck, and she did it while still, somehow, reaching up over the hull to put bursts into the pinch with one hand, keeping the door shut even as she dragged me through it. And then she put me down against the wheel, hard but not careless, and she looked at me for half a second, and I will tell you what she said, because it is the only thing she said to me in the entire battle. "Put your hand on it," she said. "Press. Don't look at it, look at me." Her eyes were absolutely steady. There was no fear in them and no fury in them, just that bottomless calm, and it went into me like cold water and steadied me when nothing else on earth could have. "You're not done. Press and breathe, and you're not done." Then she was gone, back up onto the mount, and the gun was hammering again, and I sat against that wheel with my hand jammed against the hole in my leg, and I breathed because she had told me to, and I lived because she had told me I would. From the ground I watched the rest of it. I had a low cracked view between the wheels, and I saw the whole shape of how she finished it, and even broken and bleeding and stupid with shock, I understood that I was watching something I would never see again. She had them in 3 pieces now. The guns on the walls were mostly dead or fled. The one she judged could hurt her gone first, the rest scattered and firing wild. The low element was stacked up at the pinch, unable to come through, taking her fire and breaking against it like water against a rock. And the survivors of the whole ambush, 30-some men who had come into that channel certain they were about to slaughter a column of helpless drivers, were discovering all at once that they had instead walked into the killing geometry of one person who understood the ground better than they did, and had turned their own perfect trap inside out. She did not let them gather themselves. That was the genius of it and the mercy of it both, though mercy is a strange word for what it was. She kept the pressure absolute and unrelenting, never giving them the half-second they needed to coordinate, to rush, to mass. She fired and she shifted and she read and she fired, and she drove them, the way a sheepdog drives, not killing everyone but breaking the will of all of them, herding the survivors back up the channel and out, back the way they had come, until the fire from the walls had stopped entirely and the men at the pinch had melted away into the rocks, and the only guns still firing in the whole length of the throat were ours. And then she stopped. I do not know how long the battle lasted. In memory it is both an instant and an age. The watches said it was 11 minutes from the first crack of the gunship dying to the last shot fired, 11 minutes, and I have never been able to make that number fit the size of what happened inside it. 11 minutes to lose the column, and 1 person to win it back. The silence afterward was its own kind of violence. When the guns stop in a place like that, the quiet does not feel like peace. It feels like a held breath, like the world waiting to see if it is truly over or only pausing. The smoke from the gunship and the burning truck stood up in still columns now that there was no wind of fire to bend them. Somewhere a man was crying out, the high thin sound of a bad wound, and somewhere else another man was saying a name over and over, and under it all was the ticking of hot metal cooling, and the small, terrible, ordinary sounds of after. She came down off the mount. She did it slowly this time, the speed gone out of her now that the work was done, and she stood for a moment with one hand on the hull of Ray's truck, just resting it there, and I saw, from my place on the ground, looking up at her through the wheels, I saw her hand. It was the only part of her that betrayed anything. Through the whole battle she had been absolute machined, without a wasted motion or a tremor, and now in the quiet, with no one shooting at her and nothing left to do, her hand shook. A fine tremor just at the fingers, the body finally letting out what the will had held back. She looked at it for a second, almost curious, the way you'd look at a thing that belonged to someone else. Then she closed it into a fist, and the tremor was gone, folded away inside the calm, and she turned to the work of the wounded. That was the first thing she did. Not rest, not speak. The wounded. She went down the line, and she was as exact with a tourniquet and a pressure bandage as she had been with the gun, and I understood dimly, through my own pain, that this too was something she had been before, that the hands that had read the battle could also stop the bleeding, that whatever she truly was, it was a thing that had spent a long time learning how to keep men alive. We had lost men. I want to set that down plainly, because a story like this can make it sound as though one person can win and no one pays, and that is not true, and she would not have wanted it told that way. The scout crew was gone. Ray's gunner was gone, the man she had lifted so gently out of the mount. 2 of the drivers were gone, and a young trooper I had played cards with the week before, and the medics worked over others who would not see mourning whatever anyone did. She did not pretend otherwise. She did not tell the living that it could have been worse, though it could have, though by every measure it should have been all of us. She moved among the wounded with that terrible exactness, and she did not waste their pain on comfortable lies. When a man asked her if his friend was alive, she told him the truth, gently and without flinching, and then she stayed with him for the few seconds she could spare before the next man needed her, her hand on his arm, present in a way that asked nothing and gave everything. I think that is its own kind of courage, rarer than the kind that takes a gun up a swept channel. The courage to tell a frightened man the truth and not leave him alone inside it. She got to me last because I had already pressed and breathed the way she'd told me to and was therefore not the most likely to die, and she had triaged me in a glance the way she triaged everything. She knelt and looked at the leg, and her hands moved, quick and sure, tightening what I had done, and she said, "Good. You listened. That's why you're still here." And there was the smallest thing in her voice then, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it, an acknowledgement. And I, who had laughed about her reading the future in the dust, felt my throat close so hard I could not answer her. It was Ray's who said the thing out loud that we were all thinking. Ray's, the captain who had pointed her to the back of the column and told her she was not here to fight. He had survived. He'd been pinned in the cab of his truck for most of it, unable to move, unable to do anything but watch through his windscreen the same way I'd watched from the ground. And when the medics finally got to us, when the relief column we'd given up on came pounding down the throat an hour later because somebody at the outpost had heard the gunship go off the air and come looking, Ray's climbed down out of his truck and walked over to where she was working, and he stood there for a long moment. And then he said, in a voice that did not sound like his, "Who are you?" It was not a challenge. It was not the bark of an officer to a subordinate. It was the honest, helpless question of a man who has just watched his entire understanding of the world come apart and be rebuilt in front of him. Who are you? Because the answer could not be the driver. The answer he had written on his roster, the answer he had believed without a second's doubt, was a lie, and he knew it now, and he needed the truth. She finished the bandage she was tying. She did not hurry it for him. Then she stood and faced him, and she did not give him a name. She gave him, instead, 3 words, flat and quiet. "Pull my file." They pulled her file that night, back at the outpost, in the low light of the operations tent, and I was there for part of it because they had me on a cot in the corner with my leg packed and splinted, waiting on the bird that would take the worst of us out, and the tent was where the radios were, and so the tent was where everyone gathered. I drifted in and out on the morphine, but I caught the shape of it, and what I did not catch that night I learned later, in pieces, the way you learn anything true about a person who will not tell you herself. Most of the file was redacted. Whole pages of it were black bars, dates and places and unit designations swallowed by the censor's ink, and that in itself told the men in that tent more than any printed word could have. You do not redact a driver. You do not classify a chauffeur. The blacked-out pages were a language all their own, and every soldier in that tent could read them, and the reading of them changed the air in the place. What was not redacted was enough. She had been a pilot, not a transport pilot, not a supply pilot, though she could fly those too, and had, which is how a woman with her record had come to be sitting behind the wheel of a fuel tanker, because she had asked for the quietest, lowest, most anonymous posting the Army had, and they had given it to her. And none of us had ever wondered why a driver knew how to read dust and ground and the geometry of a kill zone. She had flown attack birds and she had flown rescue, and the part of her record that was not blacked out was a record of going into places no one else would go to pull men out who everyone else had written off. There was a call sign in the file, used in the after-action reports that the censor had left, used by the men she had saved, and the reports noted, by the enemy who had learned to fear the sound of her bird coming low and fast out of the dark. They had a word for her, those enemies, a word in their own tongue that the reports translated, and the word was ladron. The thief. Because she stole men back. That was what it meant. When a crew went down behind the lines, when a patrol was cut off and surrounded, and the night was coming and everyone with sense had already started writing the letters home, she was the one who went in over the guns in the dark and took them back, stole them out of the hands of the men who already counted them dead. The thief. They had named her in fear, and we inherited the name in awe. And by the time the file had gone around that tent, passed hand to hand, no one was calling her the driver anymore. They were saying it the other way, the enemy's way, the true way, ladron. I lay on my cot and I listened to the men say it, and I thought about the staging pad, and Dahlin asking her if she cut hair, and myself laughing about the fortune teller reading the dust, and I was glad of the dark in my corner because I did not want anyone to see my face. She came into the tent late, after the file had done its work, after the truth of her had already filled the place. She had been outside with the wounded and the dead, doing the slow, grim arithmetic of after, and she did not know yet what the men inside had learned. She came in to give a report on the casualties, all business, her voice flat and even, and she stopped just inside the flap because she felt the change in the room before she understood it. Every man in that tent was looking at her, and then Ray stood up. I have seen a great many salutes in my life. Most of them mean nothing, a reflex, a courtesy, the small coin of military manners spent without thought. I have given thousands I did not feel. But I have seen, perhaps 3 or 4 times in all my years, a salute that was something else entirely, a salute that came up out of a man from a place below thought, that was not a courtesy but a confession and an apology and an act of worship all at once. That is what Rays gave her. He came to attention, a hard, square man, a captain, 20 years in, a man who had pointed her to the back of the column 10 hours before and told her she was not here to fight, and he brought his hand up slow and exact, and he held it, and his face was not the face of an officer. It was the face of a man asking to be forgiven. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracked on the single word, "I told you to drive the trucks. I told you to point them back the way we came and not stop for anybody." He swallowed. "You went the other way. You came up the line. You came down off that gun for one of mine in the open." His eyes went for just a moment to my corner, to me on the cot, and then back to her. "I was wrong about you in every way a man can be wrong. Forgive an old fool, ladron." And she did the thing that I have never forgot, the thing that told me finally and completely what she was made of. She did not wave it off. She did not say it was nothing, the way the falsely modest do, turning the moment back to themselves. And she did not stand taller in it, did not let it feed any hunger in her, because there was no hunger in her. That was the whole of it. That was the secret the rest of us had never had. She simply received it. She came to attention herself, and she returned the salute, exact and grave, soldier to soldier, and she held his eyes while she did it, and there was no triumph in her face and no reproach, only a kind of steady acknowledgement, an acceptance of a thing offered honestly. "Captain," she said, and that was all, but the way she said it gave him back his dignity in the same motion that he had laid it down, and I watched a man who had been broken open in front of his command be made whole again by one word from the person he had wronged, and I understood that this too was a kind of skill, maybe the rarest one she had. Then it happened down the line. It did not come as an order. No one called the tent to attention. It moved through that gathering of men the way a wind moves through grass, one bending and then the next and the next without a word, each man standing and bringing his hand up because the man beside him had, and beneath that because they all needed to, because there was no other thing a person could do in that moment that would mean anything. The radio operator stood. The two medics stood. The drivers who had survived stood, and the gunners, and the men from the relief column who had not even been in the fight but had heard, in the hour since they arrived, the whole of what she had done, and they stood too. The tent filled with the small sound of boots and bodies coming to attention, and then the larger silence of all of them holding the salute at once, 20 men, 30, every one of them facing the woman in the doorway who that morning had been only the driver. And Dahlin. I looked for Dahlin. Because of all of us he had earned the moment most and deserved it least, and I found him near the front, the boy with the bad mouth who had asked her if she could open a pickle jar, and he was standing at attention with tears running openly down his face and his hand up at his brow, and his arm was shaking, and he was looking at her with an expression I can only call grief, the grief of a young man discovering all at once the size of his own smallness. She looked at him a moment longer than the others. I think she remembered the staging pad too. And then she gave him a single nod, the briefest thing, a kind of absolution, and Dahlin's face came apart entirely, and he held the salute through it, and it was the most dignified I ever saw him. I could not stand. I tried. The medics had me strapped to the cot and my leg was a ruined thing, and when I tried to rise one of them put a hand on my chest and held me down, gently. So I did the only thing I could do. I brought my hand up from where I lay up to my brow, and I held it there, flat on my back on a cot in the corner of that tent, and I saluted her from the ground the way she had pulled me up off the ground, and across all those standing men her eyes found me in my corner, found the one trooper she had carried out of the open, and she held my gaze for a moment, and she nodded once to me, the way she had to Dahlin. I have been given medals in my life. I have shaken the hands of generals. None of it has ever weighed what that single nod weighed, given to me by a woman whose name I never learned, from across a crowded tent, while I lay broken and saluting from a cot, both of us soldiers, both of us alive because she had decided we would be. The bird took me out that night. I did not see her again. By the time I was healed and back in the world she had moved on, transferred or recalled or simply vanished back into the quiet anonymity she had asked for in the first place, and the army, in its way, closed over the space where she had been. There was no medal ceremony that I ever heard of, no parade, no article. The men who were there knew, and we carried it, and the rest of the world went on not knowing, and I have come to believe that this was exactly as she wanted it. She had never done any of it to be seen. The proof of that was in the posting itself. A person with a record like hers, choosing the back of a fuel column, choosing to be no one. The recognition that found her in that tent was a thing she accepted out of respect for the men who needed to give it, not a thing she had ever gone looking for. That, more than the gun, more than the geometry, more than the impossible 11 minutes, is what I have spent my life trying to understand. I told you I have told this story twice before, and I told you the first time was at a kitchen table. That was Dahlin's table 20 years on. He found me, the way the men who were there found each other over the years, the way you do. He had a wife by then, and 2 daughters and a small house and a quiet life, and he had built it, I think, in the shape of the lesson he learned in that tent. Because he was a gentle man by the time I knew him as a grown one, gentle in a deliberate, worked-at way. The way a man is gentle who remembers exactly what he was at 22 and has spent his life making sure he is never that again. We sat at his table and his older daughter, who was perhaps 16 and had announced that she wanted to fly, that she wanted to be an army aviator, and whose mother was against it, and whose father did not know what to say, sat across from us with her chin up and her jaw set, daring us to tell her no. And Dahlin looked at me, and I looked at him. And without a word passing between us, we both knew what the other was thinking. And it was the staging pad, and it was the pickle jar, and it was a tent full of men with their hands at their brows and tears on their faces. So I told her the story. The whole of it, the way I have told it to you, the dust and the throat and the gunship coming down and the driver stepping out into the kill zone, and the geometry and the gun and the hand at my vest and the file and the salute that ran through the tent like wind through grass. The girl listened without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the only question that mattered, the question I had been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me so that I could answer it. What was her name? And I told her the truth. I told her I never learned the name on her papers, the one the army filed her under, the one her mother gave her. I told her it was redacted from everything I ever saw, blacked out, gone. But I told her the other name, the true one, the one the enemy gave her in fear and the men in that tent gave her in awe, and I told her what it meant. They called her Ladron, I said, the thief, because when they had you surrounded in the dark and counted dead, she came in over the guns and she stole you back. The girl looked at me across her father's table, and her chin was still up, and her jaw was still set, but something had come into her eyes, something steady and far off and certain, the beginning of the thing I had seen in the woman in the doorway of the tent. And Dahlin, beside me, who had cried at attention 20 years before and would not have been ashamed to do it again, put his hand over his daughter's hand on the table, the same hand that had once come up in a salute he didn't deserve to give, and he did not tell her no. That is the whole of it. That is what I carry. We called her the driver and we laughed, and we were wrong in every way that men can be wrong. And one woman who had chosen to be no one stood up in the worst place on earth and took apart a trap that should have killed us all, and pulled me out of the open with one hand while she held the line with the other, and then asked nothing for it and vanished. And the only payment she ever took, the only one she ever wanted, was the sound of 30 men coming to attention in a tent, and a 16-year-old girl at a kitchen table 20 years later, deciding she would learn to fly. I do not know where she is now. I like to think she is somewhere quiet, somewhere she has chosen, anonymous the way she always wanted, no one knowing what she was. But I will tell you what I believe, late at night, when the leg aches the way it does in cold weather and I am back in the throat with the smoke standing up in the still air. I believe that somewhere, even now, there are men who are surrounded in the dark, who have been counted dead by everyone including themselves, who do not yet know that they are about to be stolen back. And I believe that whatever name is on her papers, in the only language that ever mattered, the language of the men she carried out, and the enemy who feared the sound of her coming, her name was the truest name a soldier can have. Her name was the one you whisper when all hope is gone and you hear, against all reason, the sound of someone coming for you anyway. Ladron, the thief who stole us back. And I was only the corporal who laughed at her, once, on a staging pad, in the white morning light before I knew.